Greetings from summery Sunshine Canyon, and we know it's summer because the aspen leaves here are green outside my house, even though it's the middle of October. Okay, the much anticipated, well, maybe not, the very important hip function and how to use your hips. And there's two parts. If you know how to use your hips and you work with your hips, your life can go on an awesome adventure and journey of hopefully joy and purpose. Or if you don't understand how your hips work, it's probably the hero's journey for you. And I don't think running should be a hero's journey. Our life is a hero's journey enough. So you need to pay attention. This is something you really, really need to understand. I'm very, very happy for people to comment below if you disagree, or if you have other points of interest, or if you think this is factually not correct. Once you really understand fundamentally and have a sense of knowing and trusting your hips and pelvis, then you can start to make way more appropriate decisions on how to train them, how to strengthen them. This is a sort of source or a topic of a lot of controversy. I get people that literally, tell me to end my life and delete my Instagram account over this. But anyway, don't shoot the messenger. This is just how it is. And once you really understand your hips and pelvis, then it's a hell of a lot easier to start saying, okay, this is what I want to do and this is how I want to approach things. And I know it sounds bizarre, but probably 9 out of 10 of you don't use your hips properly and literally run the wrong way around. So first and foremost, I think the most important thing is to understand is we want to have a sense of moving with length and space, or from the center out when it comes to the pelvis, and not reactive or from the outside in. And listen very carefully to those words. Okay. No tension. Tension and strength, especially when it comes to your pelvis, are antithesis. Okay, so there's strong and there's tension, and they don't. Tension doesn't imply strength, and strength doesn't imply tension. You need relaxed pelvis to move well, and a sense of moving from the center out. So if you're the person that sort of sits like this and hates their run photos, this is for you. Okay, sorry, there's a pine cone here. We've got to get rid of the pine cone. Okay. So I think, yeah, let's just talk about that. So let's just describe the pelvis first, and then we're going to give you strategies on how to sort your pelvis out. But if you get your pelvis movement out, your running efficiency goes through the roof, your rate of injuries drops through the floor, your ability to breathe, to move, to show up in the world completely changes. And we want for you running to be an awesome experience filled with, running is always a little tough to get out the door and a little bit hard, but it should be something that gives you great joy and purpose and enhances and enriches your life, because you deserve it. And running should not be a hero's journey of frustration and too many trials and tribulations and injury. Okay, so timing. Okay, one is, if you look at your race pictures and you look like this, you shouldn't be in this position in the first place. Like, it's a timing issue. You shouldn't even make that shape. So how do we get out of that shape? The quickest way is actually just to realize I should be in this shape. And one of the easiest tools to learn that is with the flow rope. So we go stacking one side, base of support, head of a foot, rope comes down, and you learn that shape with the flow rope, which there is a video on, and you start to learn a shape that's way more appropriate than this. Why do we get into that position? Well, because of grabbing and tension. Okay, so you're going to find you've got very, very big, powerful adductors and hamstrings, very powerful hip flexors, and your iliacus and psoas are very, very powerful hip flexors. And when they grab for stability, it'll grab you into this position. You can sort of see people that have done a lot of adductor strength work. When they walk, their knees actually dip inwards as they walk, because the adductors are pulling too strongly. So really simple way of thinking about this is to think you want to move and run with the outside of your hip, not the insides. Okay. Anything that I say that's not factually correct or that you disagree with, please put it in the comments below. I'm explaining the rules. And so we want to be technically correct in terms of anatomy function. Okay. But basically, using the outside of your hip will create length and space. Another big misconception where people get into trouble is they think your hips must be static or held. They must not. They must be very, very dynamic in movement. So if I walk towards you, watch my hips, you can see with my hands, they're moving a lot. How do we know this? Because my shoulders are dynamic. So there's this big hip to shoulder connection, and that's transverse movement, and you have to have it in your running. If you keep your upper body still, if you try and engage your core, if you try and suppress top down, your hips will move underneath you and you'll move around your hips, kind of like a robot, okay? But what happens, that creates that tension. We need to move from the center out. We need to have length and space. If I'm walking with my hips, as I step, this space gets longer. If I'm engaging my core, if I'm tightening down, if I'm bracing or guarding and making this a block, shutting down that healthy organic movement is going to make it show up violently or exaggeratedly, that's not a word, in a more exaggerated way somewhere else. So if you don't have appropriate thoracic rotation and your hips are static and tight, you might find that your knee twists, and so you get knee pain. So it's really, really important to think clearly about this. Okay, so one of the easiest things you can do to have healthy hip function, as I said, is learn head over foot, the timing with the rope. We can also really, really powerfully learn how to get this give and take movement that is essential and vital and healthy through backward walking. So backward walking, I'll do a whole video on backward walking, but backward walking is basically your belly button towards your lead leg, belly button towards your lead leg, walking backwards. And that's called contralateral gait. Homolateral gait is we can be so tight in our pelvis and hip flexors that when we step away from our lead leg. Again, that's why I said a lot of you watching will actually be stuck in homolateral gait, and then you're trying to fix it, and that's not going to work. Okay, so you need to proactively step towards your front leg, and one of the best ways again is learning this backwards. Okay. And again, when these muscles really grab and tight, they can be held, so you'll step like this and step like this, and you're trying to fix it with your upper body because no one's running down the road like this. So you'll step, be out of pattern, but try and correct it with your upper body, and then your upper body's fighting your lower body, your hips caught out of pattern. Okay, so it's very, very important to learn contralateral movement, and contralateral movement can get shut down because of trauma, falling on your butt when you're young, sitting too much as kindergarten, I don't know, riding bicycles, being miscued. So it's very, very common for people to have a lot of trauma and held tension in their body that they're not aware of. And then it's modifying your movement and you're blind to it. Okay, just remember with a lot of respect, a lot of people that run a lot are doing so because it gives you a sense of peace. So like in the trail running community, people run themselves into exhaustion because you're looking for a sense of calm. You're running away. It's very common for people that chase endurance activities excessively to be running away from problems or to have some sort of trauma-based thing. So it's like, as my dear friends once said, it's the bottle or the bike, you know. So basically they ride bicycles rather than drink alcohol. So you've got to respect that, you know, many of us, and I include myself, you know, come from very traumatized backgrounds. As my brother says, you only run that much if you're running away from something or if you're chased. Okay, so with compassion, we need to understand that we might be influenced to move a certain way and not even be aware of it. So let's just dial down exactly what goes on with our hips and pelvis. So we have two big giant hip bones on either side, and in between we have a sacrum wedge. So the sacrum is the base of your spine, comes up out of between the two big sort of ala or ilium, these two big hip bones that you can feel. And then we have a femur with a ball and socket joint. Right. We're going to start with the femur. We know exactly what the femur does, and anatomically we can tell you what the femur does. Okay, so the femur, which is this big thigh bone, when you walk, it goes down. Okay, so it's got to press the earth away. It's got to go backwards. It's got to go back into extension. And what it does do, and it should do, and it must do, is move from an externally rotated pattern to an internally rotated pattern. Okay, so your femur is doing three things: pushing down into the ground. Okay, what we don't want is landing and it's almost coming up, right? There's our sucky race photo. So it's got to be pushing down into the ground, okay, going backwards, and then the pattern of your hip joint, because of the way your ligaments work and the shape of your hip joint, is forward flexion and external rotation, and as it goes underneath you, it swaps from external rotation to internal rotation. Now we have contralateral gait. Okay, so outside to inside. That's my femur. Watch my hand. It's going external rotation to internal rotation. The sticking point for most people is going from the outside to internal rotation and extension. That's the part that people break down on. So you land in external rotation, you're stuck in external rotation, it doesn't want to go internally, and you're stuck in your homolateral gait, and then you try and fix it. Okay, almost all rehab, okay, is external rotation and flexion pattern. Okay, so if you think about doing monster band walks, if you think about doing clam exercises, if you think about single leg work, if you think about squats, if you think about deadlift, if you think about RDLs, it's all flexion of the hip and external rotation biased. There's almost no rehab exercises that you're doing that focuses on extension and internal rotation. And running is land, travel forward, and then drive. So the most critical part for driving and health in your running is actually with your knee behind your hip. And most people don't do any knee behind the hip rehab. But Lawrence, I do split stance and I do squats, or I do lunges. Lunges are front leg biased. So when you're lunging, and especially if you hold a weight, all the weight's in your front leg, not your back leg. You're rehabbing the front leg. Step ups, front leg, flexion, okay? Split stance. You're hanging on the front of your hip. Okay, so that's where the controversy comes in. Most of your rehab that you're doing is not hip specific or not gait specific for your hip. And that's why so many people battle with labrum tears that won't come right, and sacral stress fractures and femoral neck fractures. Yeah, this is really, really simple. The quality of your movement is more important than the strength you put in, because if you put strength in, you need to, with great power comes great responsibility. So if you're going to strengthen this, you then need to use that strength appropriately, or it can almost hurt you worse. You see what I'm saying? Okay. So the femur, now we know what the femur does. It goes down, it goes from outside towards inside, and it translates down into the ground. So we can practice that with the rope, internal head over foot, and that sort of notion. And we can practice with backward walking, and then a really, really good way of strengthening your hips is to strengthen it going forward with a tire or resistance. So we learn to step, okay, knee behind hip, internal rotation, extension, driving the earth away with resistance, and that'll really, really strengthen your hips in a gait-specific pattern. And that gets most people across the line. I'm going to do a video on resisted walking. The other quick tip that you could do if you say, well, what do I do in gym, is simply put, instead of doing split stance or lunges, just put your front foot on a step. And what will happen is your weight, your whole back leg, if you shift forward, the weight's all on your back leg, and you can do your favorite exercises with a backward based leg bias. Okay, so if my foot's up on a step, I'm now strengthening my back leg. So that's really sort of simple. Okay. So I hope you got that. Now we're going to talk about what the pelvis does, and the pelvis basically does a figure of 8 posterior magic thing. Okay, so people, a lot of people will be held tight, feel like you have an anterior tilt, and then you're trying to solve that by like tucking your tail under. Just remember, an anterior tilt, if your pelvis, if the base of your spine is tilted anteriorly, in your pelvis, you probably find you have a closed pelvis. And so when you roll your pelvis back, your tailbone goes further forward, and it makes you very front-based in your gait. So we want our hips to come and release and become underneath us, and have a sense of our spine floats out of neutral hips, right? Your pelvis, as you step forward, actually rotates back. So this big hip bone that you can feel, the ilium, actually rotates back as you step forward. So in most people's mind, it either should be still or static, or as you go forward, it drops down. It does not, or it should not. It should actually rotate backwards to set up that hip extension, and then it goes down. So it's doing this, okay? And that's why we pattern the rope with your shoulders going backwards, because when I walk, watch my hand, my pelvis should go back and then down, and back and then down. It's the same with your golf swing. When you you're here and you're rotating forward, this pelvis does not go down, it actually opens up. Rotating back is how your function works better. Okay, so with what we do is we will practice often one knee at a time, rolling your pelvis back and knee goes away. Rolling your pelvis back and knee goes away, because that creates the sequence or the pattern of open hips. Okay, if you have a lot of tension in here and your pelvis is anteriorly rotated and you take a step, that's when you start to get the pinch lesions, the cam lesions, and often sort of labrum tears, because basically, you know, you're running out of real estate here and you're pinching your hip because this is grad and then diving forward. This opens up, look how much it opens up the space here. And then we travel forward in a stacked joint. So that's also a really, really important, I think, sort of misconception about how the pelvis works. It's basically rolling backwards, not rolling forwards, okay? We talk about this anterior chain, posterior chain, or front of the horse and the back of the horse. And then your sacrum, which is in the wedge between those two bones, counter-nutates. So it does the opposite of whatever your hips are doing. And in a healthy gait pattern, my back is very, very quiet and stable here because my sacrum is so animated. Okay. So that's kind of healthy hip function. You know, when you stand, we want this hip to lift up. There is this sort of sequencing of rotating backwards and forwards. Don't obsess too much about it. If you want to dive down, I think somewhere I've got a YouTube video on step 1 and step 2, which is really learning the basic hip function. If you've got a really locked up pelvis, it's worthwhile lying on the floor and just doing gentle pelvic locks and really enhancing your awareness of this region if you're really stuck and injured and having a hard time. But for most people, just practicing backward walking and then forward resisted walking will set you up for healthy running and walking patterns. And a lot of the time you want to learn this walking. Okay, so getting your hands will often pull you out of trouble. So if you're using your hands to generate speed, or if you're thinking about making your feet move faster, you'll move from the outside in and move with tension. We're moving from the inside out. And again, walking with resistance really teaches you to generate power from the center. Swinging the rope really teaches you to move from the center out. And those will really if you're stuck and you're traumatized and you're in flexion and you used a lot of tension, and you've used a lot of tension in your gait patterns, and now you want to move with length and space and you want to try and reverse that, you might just find that sensation of opening up, being enough, showing up in the world, moving from the center out is actually the thing that really, really helps. Okay. Yeah, and that's kind of it. So leave comments below if you've watched this far. Thank you. And let's try and figure out what else we need to help get you across the line and what your frustration and stuck points are. But the next 2 videos will be backward walking and then resisted walking, and then I will do a video on really, really powerful ways of unlocking your pelvis and restoring proper pelvic function. But remember, this is really, really important for your breath, for your nervous system health, your parasympathetic nervous system health. When you learn how to use your pelvis properly, your whole nervous system unwinds and your breath opens up and your blood lactate will change, and it's like a really, really big deal. Okay, so take care, look after yourself. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you don't understand. Let me know if you have a different opinion. And let's make the world a better place, one walk, run at a time. Thank you.